coaching or training, whether it be through sports
Mm,
or strength conditioning or working at a gym, is really just like a vehicle through which you
mm.
can help with human connection, both from your own standpoint and from others. We're just connecting with people in their life, and then hopefully it helps them be more of who they can be. It's like the same way that you're giving someone more movement experiences,
Mm.
you're letting them know that it's okay to be them.
That was Jon Stea, and you're listening to the Just Fly Performance Podcast. Today's podcast is sponsored by Gym Studio. Gym Studio is a frictionless gym and studio management software. It can effortlessly manage memberships, schedule classes, track attendance, and even automate billing. To check out what Gym Studio can do for you, head to gymstudio.com and set up your free 14-day trial in less than 5 minutes. Welcome to another episode of the podcast. Great to have you here. This week's guest is Jon Stea. Jon is a strength and performance coach based out of Vancouver, British Columbia. He has over a decade of experience developing athletes from youth up to the professional level. Jon combines cutting-edge coaching practices with an emphasis on the overarching philosophy of sport, learning, and movement concepts. On the show today, Jon talks about building a training process that gives athletes room to fail, learn, and grow, expanding their abilities as well as their love of movement over time. This was an awesome podcast. I really enjoyed Jon's perspective, and there were so many great seeds of conversation in this one. Let's get to 452 here with Coach Jon Stea. And you had a post. It's like I almost hate to say it because as soon as people hear it, it's like, wait, we're talking about speed, right? But you said you're like the slow twitch king, your nickname, but it's more like your capacity. Like I know hockey and work capacity and stuff like that. But tell me about like that nickname and a little bit about how at least having a high capacity for work has shaped your thoughts on training or
Um,
anything like that.
Yeah, I mean that started. I think I took the idea actually. It was like rugby strength coach had something where he had put that up, and I think it was in regards to him doing a ton of like aerobic capacity work, which I don't know what it was about where I came up in training, but I have always been one of those guys that's predisposed to volume work and
Mm-hmm.
work capacity. And I don't think I have a fast twitch muscle fiber in my body. I am fighting against it with every fiber of my being in training to the point where I think when I was coming up in training, like the whole powerlifting community and culture
Mm-hmm.
was huge, and I ran one of those Shako programs where you're squatting,
Oh
4 or 5 times a
yeah.
week, and I think I put maybe 5 pounds on my one rep
Ah,
max,
nice.
but my 80% turned into like a 20 RM.
Oh wow.
Uh, it was so there was just no transfer at the top end, and I think ever since then I've always been the same way. I've been someone who can rep out something
Mm-hmm.
that's way too high in the percentages, and then my max strength is just terrible. Uh, then where that's kind of I think reflected a lot of my biases in training is I've always just been one to do a lot more in my own programs, probably excessively. I mean, I think as strength coaches, we've all been that teenager that wants to work out for 2 hours plus
Mm-hmm.
every day. And that probably carried on a little bit longer than it should. And then even in my own programming style, I think it takes a step back for me to actually take things out of a workout
Mm-hmm.
instead of just, oh, that's a good idea. We'll put that in. We'll put that in. We'll put that in. Because my bias would be that I could always handle more.
Yeah. You'd be one of those guys who would probably thrive off. I have this book on my bookshelf somewhere. It's like the super squats book, like the origin of the 20 rep breathing squats where you put I think that's it. You put your 80% on the bar and you just don't stop the set until you have finished 20 reps or something, even if it takes like 5 minutes. So maybe that type of thing. I look at that too. And I remember people who were more the distance, like the endurance athletes I worked with at Cal, especially, like we do 1 by 20 like blocks, and those guys would always blow up. Like their muscle, they hadn't gained a pound, and then we do sets of 20, and they just start like. And honestly, some of them shouldn't. It's like, hey, you're a distance swimmer, you shouldn't gain 5 pounds. But that always taught me something interesting about how that needle never moved for some of those kids. And then all of a sudden,
Yeah.
you just drop that high rep stuff in there, and then that's like their jam.
Yeah, it's I think that's the other thing too. I've always enjoyed things that are slow, long, naturally, even though as much as I would love to be able to jump a little bit higher, it's so much easier for me to go the other way. I mean, the best example is I started me and everyone else, I started running this past summer, And then within, I think 2 or 3 months, I could do like a sub 25K and, like a running at like a 430 kilometer pace on a 10K sort of thing after having not run more than 1 or 2 kilometers.
Mm,
Sorry to use the Canadian units here,
that's
but
okay.
in at least 4 or 5 years.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I'm getting used to that because on my Polar heart monitor, it says, here's your kilometer pace. And I'm like, this should be how I do it. I should be on kilometers for sure. But it is interesting too, because I think sometimes I remember very vividly, I don't know if I was in high school, probably college, somewhere in college, as I was starting to read a lot more about like, yeah, powerlifting literature and muscle twitch type. And it might have been the early days of T Nation and maybe some Poliquin stuff or something, but it was like, you should be able to do your 80% 1RM. And I think it depends on the lift too, because, if you're squat or bench, it's still a different story of those things. But if you lift it about 8 to 10 times, that's normal. If you can only lift your 80% like 6 times, you must be more fast twitch. And if you can lift it more than 10, however many times, you're more slow twitch. And I remember I could lift it more for sure. And I was like, that was depressing to think. I was like, oh no, I'm more slow twitch. But I think in hindsight, part of that is I think I was also just efficient elastically, like kind of getting in the groove and the rhythm of the bar, kind of manipulating the body to do that kind of thing. I definitely think that was a substantial part of it. So maybe I landed in the middle, but I ended up getting I got a few DNA tests, and one said I had the double copy of the fast twitch. So I'm like, well, I got to have something because I did decent in track, like jumps, not more than sprints, so more like elasticity and you say delay strategy and stuff. But then the most recent one I got said I had a high aerobic trainability, like you have low, medium, high, and that made sense to me. And I say this in the sense that I think we just in the push that's just straight into headlong speed, power, and that alone. I think if you neglect some of your superpowers, I think you actually have a worse experience with some of those things. In the sense, it's harder to recover from the pure speed and power, especially. And I look at like when I played basketball in high school and my aerobic was higher, I just recovered really fast and was innately bouncy.
Mhm.
And that compliment, and I think about that compliment, how even if speed and power, is the goal, and ultimately it is for so many times, there is still that touch or flavor of your unique or innate physiology that still has to be in the mix somehow, some way, or you're not really hitting the fullness of who you are in trying to improve those outputs.
Yeah, and then I think too, whenever you have something that is, like I like that you use the term your superpower, but it's whenever you have those things, it'll hopefully set you up for almost easier wins. So I
Mm.
think on both ends, it's like you not only are hopefully more successful at the training then, but then you also just enjoy it more.
Yes. Yeah, I totally agree. I even think too, like, I know it was the mile when the mile, I shouldn't say the mile, 1,500 meters at the Olympic final. Cole Hocker from the United States, they were saying his last, 300, it was like a 39. So it's like a 42-second 400 on the last lap of the mile. That's fast. Like we think of these people as distance runners, and even 5K runners who have been known to drop sub 54 400s easily on the last lap. And they could probably beat the average, let's just say high school male varsity athlete easily in a 100-meter sprint. And so, but yet it's in there. And of course they're built to run too, obviously, like that's obvious, but I just think it's interesting how, aligning with your superpower and you're doing speed work. I just think there's more to the equation than we often put into it. And then, yeah, finding those things that are fundamentally enjoyable. Like even, I know for myself, you say that, John, I love a workout where I challenge myself aerobically, where you feel it, like you feel it in your chest, and sometimes
Yeah.
I forget about what it's like to walk away from basketball practice feeling that. And it doesn't have to be slow twitch. You can add dynamic flavors to it and all sorts of stuff. And actually, I have to do that. If I just go out and run 6 miles, like the worst. But if I can get something like a good GPP day and with all sorts of different stimuli and walk away just feeling it in my body, oh, it's so good. Like, and I think sometimes I forget about that. So it's definitely interesting. I've gotten a lot more into like, yeah, the polar zones and all that. it's
Yeah.
it's kind of been a forgotten thing for me. So yeah, but it's interesting. So you were hockey. You grew up playing hockey, or what was your athletic background?
No, I actually didn't.
Oh,
So I know I'm probably like the the only Canadian that isn't an effective hockey player. I just kind of stumbled my way backwards into working with hockey players. So my like youth athletic background is more football, wrestling, rugby, a lot more contact sports, and that uh, due to sort of a series of injuries, I like ACL tears, a
Mm,
few abdominal surgeries. I kind of got out of sports from there, and then the gym was just the thing
mm,
that I was able to keep doing. And then decided that that was kind of where I wanted to take my career and schooling, and so did an undergrad and a master's degree, and was able to do the master's degree while working as a grad assistant at the University of British Columbia here, and worked a lot with rugby. And tangentially, at the same time as I was doing that master's degree, I started working at a private facility in North Vancouver
mm,
here, where there was a bit of a growing hockey program, and that was what kind of allowed me to cut my teeth and work in that area. And I think I'm not sure what the equivalent might be, but in Canada, if you're working privately with athletes, you will if you stick with it, you are going to train professional hockey players
mm,
at some point in time. They are just about everywhere. And again, they're able to use your services and work in private facilities. So you just kind of back your way into that. And I
mm,
think one thing that probably it may sound like a hindrance at first, where I didn't have the experience being a hockey player, but I think now at this point, and maybe just to justify myself, I think it probably helped me because I don't have a lot of the preconceived biases of like, oh, well, this is how I train.
mm,
When working with hockey players, I can kind of take a step back and look from a purely objective standpoint of like, oh, this makes sense to me for what you guys do. And there's a lot of stuff that off the bat does not make sense. And especially like I grew up during the whole, functional training,
mm,
like everything was stability based,
mm.
and, all hockey training had to be unstable when it very much started to let's just apply normal training principles and see where we get to that sport. That's kind of how I got more into the like hockey realm of things.
Nice. Yeah, it's interesting to think about. I guess, yeah, where are we? The blank slate, like the beginner's mind. As you said, I came from a similar vein in swimming. Like when I started working with swimming at Cal, I mean, my experience, I made it to level 3 in swim lessons. And then I was so bad, like we'd be doing the warm ups and like kids are just flying by me and I'm just dying. Like, and I was way better at swimming underwater. And I don't know. It's just, but then I got finally full circle. I'm watching like the 200 medley relay and I'm like, what's the order? Like, what's the fast? I didn't know breaststroke was the slowest stroke. I'm always like, oh, isn't it the fastest? Cause I knew nothing, but it was really a good thing because you don't have these as long as I think you have good mentors, people to help come in and teach you and give you this formation. But I kind of feel like that's something that I don't know how that could be fostered in traditional systems, but I think it's a really valuable thing. Like, I don't know, people just force people to study under different, systems or schools of thought or something. And just because I think that self-perpetuating, this is how I did it, and those biases, and then that leads to the next thing. And it's hard to expand how you think about certain things.
Yeah, I mean, well, you could kind of think of it. I guess I would think of that the same way as when you have a youth athlete that you want them to play a variety of different sports, not just to experience a lot of different movements. You would want it so that they get a variety of different coaching styles and coaching voices. You could sort of argue almost the same thing for like a young coach or like young professional, even. You'd want to experience a variety of different ways to do your craft. And maybe I'm overcomplicating
Hmm.
coaching to a point, but you'd almost want to work under, like you're saying, like different mentors, and whether that's in person with an actual coach and seeing different training styles, or even just playing around with different content and programs that you get from the internet. I think it works really well when you're able to work in a variety of places. I think personally that's one of the
Yeah.
reasons I was able to train the way I was, because I worked at a private commercial
Mm,
facility at the same time as working in a varsity gym.
mm,
It gives you just like a wide contrast of experiences where I had a lot of different reps and got to try a lot of different things with a lot of different sports. And yes, credit to the mentors that I had. I think they were awesome to be able to point me in that direction. There was a guy at UBC who's still the head strength coach there. Joe McCollum he is the man. I mean, he taught me uh, the majority of what I know, and especially that whole realm of critical thinking and being able to question your process in order to hopefully refine it. And then at privately, there was a guy named Carl Bergstrom who worked with the Warriors recently,
Mm.
who again, like same thing, taught me a lot about being able to just question what I'm doing and hopefully refine how I'm doing my program so that it's the best I can with whatever information I have at that time.
Yeah. It's interesting to think about the modern day and age of like coaching education, how we learn about training. It's like a double-edged sword with the internet because on one end, we're the most informed generation that's ever existed,
Yeah.
or society. But at the same time, like every benefit has its drawback. At the same time, we're also the most prone to like overly simplistic or reductionist or who screams the loudest about a certain thing. And it can either be the most complex and beautiful way to learn about whatever you want to learn about, or it can be the easiest way to live in your whatever your echo chamber is and argue with people and those types of things. So it's, I know for me, it's opened up a lot. And I would say doing this podcast actually has probably opened up even more, just like but what you said, I love what you said about working like in a scholastic and the private sector, just because I started to see this a lot in like threads on like social media or whatever. It's like what people ask me for recommendations. Where should I go in this industry? Or what do I tell someone who's 20 who wants to get into human performance? And most of that, it seems, is based on, well, what's the best employment opportunity? And I totally get that. What's the most secure? What's the least? I 100% get that without question. But at the same time, it's almost, in a way, it's like almost, well, that's all you're thinking about. How are you going to experience this whole thing? Like there's this scholastic or this specific population, but there's also all these different ages, all these different groups. And to paint that picture of, well, what are we like, why are we doing all this as well? Like, I know we talked before we pushed record. You said sometimes, and I agree with this, I feel the same thing as well. Sometimes we feel like we're a private physical education teacher because these kids should be having that experience already in some ways, or they're playing with their buddies in their backyard or whatever. And I do think the guided, a facilitator who can really turn those dials and make it come alive is awesome. But it is interesting to think too, like the more you experience and the more you understand of the whole thing, I just think there's something to that. And I think that's not talked about enough, is that umbrella of understanding that we gain from being in multiple arenas of this whole human performance strength and conditioning wing.
Yeah, I think there's usually, I mean, to come to your point about what advice you would give somebody when they start, I think that it really is whatever gives you the most experience.
Mm.
And at least working privately, in my experience, has given you a lot of it because you work with such a
Mhm.
wide variety of people. Whereas when you work, even though they're different sports at a university, everyone is still, an 18 to 22-year-old.
Mhm.
They are very, for the most part, like responsive to whatever kind of stimulus they're
Yes.
going to get. They're somewhat trained, and it may be a little bit different in Canada, but typically when we demonstrate something, I would say about 50% of the athletes are still able to do it significantly better than we ever are. Even if they're not, going professional or playing for a national sports organization or something after our time with them,
Mhm.
they're still very fairly competent movers, and they've got a lot of ability. Whereas on the other end of the spectrum, when you're working privately, it could be with somebody that has had no movement experience as
Mhm.
a kid. It could be with someone who's in their 60s, in their 70s, in their 80s. And your whole job then is to find a way to actually teach them. And that's where you have to become a better teacher.
Yeah.
And it's not to say that you can't refine that skill working at the collegiate or scholastic level. It's usually it's different skill sets.
Mhm.
It's managing a group, it's a training atmosphere, it's being able to triage, especially when you have 26 to 50 athletes sometimes in a group and you have to find one solution for them. Whereas when it's one person or even a group class of like 5 or 6, you have to be able to give them the best experience, because if you screw up there, then they're not coming back, and then you don't make
Yeah.
money. So there,
Mhm.
there is a bit of a benefit to, I guess, being somewhat monetarily driven as like a young coach. And that's usually my advice, is go work at a private studio where they're going to give you 20 to 30 coaching hours a week
Mhm.
that are all different, and you're going to have to churn through them. And if you do poorly, there are consequences.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that, I mean, Michael Zweifel has said it well. And I think this was before he left, he sold his business and went and he's coaching football now. But
Mm.
he had said, if you're in the university sector, I suppose even scholastic too, like where you're the school's strength coach, is those kids have to listen to you, basically. I mean, they can't fire you. You know, they have to show up. It's part of their deal. And then, but if you're in the private sector, you can, I mean, your recurring income hinges on you being good, doing a good job, professionalism and engaging experience for the athletes. Like, and there's so, but I think they both deliver a really, obviously you have to be professional at you can't just be a total, you can't just be a slot, work at the scholastic area and just goof off. There's obviously requirements too, but they're different. And I think a lot of it revolves around the athlete experience, really. Like the athlete's perception and experience of what's happening is, I think it's, and you could, that the interesting thing though too is, well, okay, let's say I'm in the private sector and a lot of this stuff is, I use a lot more games. I use a lot more things that are engaging and people are smiling and having fun. And of course we do a lot of the big rocks too. And that's fun for a lot of people as well. Timing sprints and doing lifts and stuff. But I think the thing that you would say for the private sector as well, what if the games didn't improve their performance or something? Well, why are we doing them? And I think it makes you think about the answer to that a little bit more as well. Like, and an athlete's experience versus, well, what's the carrot at the end of the stick? Wasn't it the scholarship or isn't it to win, this, that, or the other thing? I think you've written and talked about that as well, because I've thought about that a lot and I've seen a big push towards, it's not like all we do is just go in and play games, but towards like things that are very engaging and stimulating. And like Rafe Kelly said on this podcast a long time ago, a smile first, and then now we're ready. So I'd be curious what your thoughts are, or maybe even your evolution of how you've come along with that, the athlete perception and engagement. And what's the purpose of this at the end of the day? We have the scholarship and we have improving these KPIs, and we also have, this is the best part of your day, and how can we also do that?
Yeah. I think a lot of where I've changed my perspectives in coaching, or at least how they've evolved, is I've I kind of talk about coaching being almost like there's like different highs as you do it.
Mhm.
Like there's like a really rewarding high as a coach where you're running a session and you get the energy from being sort of at the front of the room or the front of the class, and you get to lead and give this energy back to people, and you get these hits of like, oh man, we taught this person something, and
Mhm.
there was this change, and there's this kind of vibe to what's going on. There's this cool connection energy there, and then over time you can sort of see how you're able to maybe impact someone's performance. It's like we are leading to that like big goal. We are doing something day in and day out that leads into this awesome objective, whether that's a professional contract, a scholarship, the weight loss goal maybe. But then I think over time, and I don't know, maybe the easiest way to simplify this is it's like I used to sort of look at maybe like the destination or that immediate outcome, and then along the way, it's you kind of start focusing more on the journey. But after a while, I think it's really just about the connection that you make with people,
Mhm.
and that's sort of where I think come to wind up is that coaching or training, whether it be through sports
Mhm.
or strength conditioning or working at a gym, is really just like a vehicle through which you
Mhm.
can help with human connection, both from your own standpoint and from others. We're just connecting with people in their life, and then hopefully it helps them be more of who they can be. It's like you're the same way that you're giving someone more movement experiences, you're letting them know that it's okay to be them. It's
Mhm.
I have a lot of friends who work in, whether it's like the psychology realm or the counseling realm. And the thing that we have over a lot of other people as like a strength and conditioning coach is, or a personal trainer
Mhm.
even, is that you have a lot of contact time with people in a low stakes environment where someone is allowed to screw up.
Yeah.
That's okay. Like that's almost the point of a session is
Mm.
I want to see you fail so that we know where we can continue to improve. So from a sporting standpoint, that might look more like we're trying to find the areas within your given activity that you're not good at, or if you're someone that in your life you want to do these activities and you're limited by something that you don't have. We want to be able to give that to you, and we're going to find things in here that you fail at, so hopefully you do more of those. But even, and I think I think I heard him talking to you about this, but I heard Austin Yoakum say something about like being a weirdo, like being that kind of
Yeah.
unique
Yeah.
person that you are. And that really resonated with me because it's something where you want to be your authentic self as much as
Hmm.
possible, because then you let the people that you're working with know that it's okay to
Yeah.
be that too. And especially when you're working with kids, it's like you forget
Oh, yeah.
how much they're modeling you and copying you and everything. Like if they see you comfortable enough to be them yourself, hopefully they are comfortable enough to be themselves. And I think that's
Yeah.
where maybe my views in coaching have really like evolved
Mm,
to. It's like it's just about helping make people the best people that they can be by being that yourself.
yeah. I love that. I'm glad you mentioned that. I was literally just talking to my wife about that the other day regarding high school track practices, just because I think it's especially the younger you go, and I think it still matters, it matters across the board. But I think the younger you go, that even rings more and more and more important because you have people at very formative times in their life. And to have, I mean, I think once you get to college, if you're a high performing athlete, there's a level of expectation of a coach who's saying, do this, do this, do this, and at any point, you need to experience that on some level. But I feel, at least right now in working with high school, I feel like that is even more important with people who are at these kind of, I don't want to say crossroads, but just kind of an awkward time, and they're trying to get everything together. And, they're in school day, they have people telling them do this and da da da. And then that time to just let them be themselves. But it's more than, like you said, this, even just spending time with Austin, like he was at a seminar I put on with him this past June, and just his, like, how he dresses, it's not like sloppy, but it's just so authentic to who he is, and the whole vibe changes because you just feel like so much more comfortable to express your movement, whether it be strength, different games, etc. He does such a good job of that, so it was really cool to experience that. And I don't know if I would have really known that until I actually met him and we did some training together and those types of things, but I'm so glad you mentioned it because that has hit more home to me the more groups I've trained. I tell this story too when I was coaching youth soccer, like 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds. I don't think this was actually a practice I did. I was at my younger son's practice. It was like 3-year-old, 4-year-olds where they like play with parachutes half the time, that kind of thing. But I'm like looking around and at different coaches and styles. And the coach who was by far the most successful in terms of just kids who are just loving it, like the kids are all jacked up, running all over the place with joy, is a guy who just was an actor. He was making it all a big like you're pirates and this is the but like he was fully sold on it. It wasn't like some like kind of a stuffy ad read. It was like he was totally into it himself. And all the kids fed off that energy and then they were totally into it. And that's like probably the extreme all the way down. But it was that realization. I was like, wow, who you are and how you present yourself and I've been reading a lot too, like just like coaching. This is probably not entirely related, but I was reading a coaching book that had a Rumi quote, and it was something to the tune of, "The first job of a teacher should be to destroy the idol that the students would make of him." Like the idea, like, "Oh, I'm this bearer of knowledge, and let me teach all of you." Like you have to destroy that so they can be themselves, authentically. And that also helped me to understand a little bit about what you mentioned with Austin, because I just think that's so, and I think too. Again, to clear, not to say it's like just dress like I was trying to think of the Senator Fetterman, like this, like that kind of. I mean, he's being himself, right? Like people could say what they want. I think it's an interesting thing. Like the U.S. Senator just kind of wears like shorts around or whatever, but like just to at least have that authenticity of yourself, and it's not just a unidirectional coaching. There's this. I do think, and it makes me think too. Have we created a system where there's so much pressure at the top that it's like kind of this system below it has emerged? You know what I'm saying? That it's like this natural offset. It's like a polarity, like because sports has gotten so insane, youth sports has gotten so insane. Now we have to have this other system, this counterculture almost. It's like weightlifting, yes, but like, and yeah, I mean, there's a veneer of all these KPIs and transfers, and this is going to help you reach. And yeah, I hope it does, But like
Yeah.
within that is this like authenticity. You can relax, have fun, connect, and even too sometimes. I'm sorry, I'm getting a little long-winded. I'm not
No,
meant
no,
to
not at
steal.
all.
I have you on the podcast, and I'm just like blah blah blah. So sorry about that. But like, you got me thinking, John. Like almost like even the games, right? Like sometimes you play games and people have fun, and you're like, oh, this is the thing. But it's really just a vehicle to connect. Like you could run a traditional, hey, let's go do bodybuilding and, bro out or whatever. And then let's just talk at the end, like say in a way, it's just a vehicle, it's a vehicle for that connection. And I think each own unit of that has a different way that you could connect with the individual too. And like looking into that, I think is also important.
Yeah, I think no, I mean like no need to follow this, Joel. That's the Canadian's job, you know. But there's so many different things I could kind of like jump off what you said there. I think like one that I really liked is like it matters who you are.
Hmm.
It's in a field like we're in where um to kind of like bring up the classic strength coach quoting Talib thing. It's
Hmm.
like any field that requires the word science after it isn't an actual science. So exercise science, by definition, it's not necessarily a real science in the way it can be
Hmm.
defined. But like our job is, it doesn't really matter what you do a lot of the time. And obviously, that's with a bit of an asterisk to it. What you do matters to a point, but it doesn't matter as much as who you are, and especially who you are to kids,
Yeah. Oh,
because
yeah.
you're trying to show them like you said, it's like you're trying to put them in this environment where they can be themselves, where they can play and they can fail. And it's I think it's more than just like within the sporting realm. I think it's almost societal, where we have this pressure to be somebody that we think we're supposed to be. And that's why maybe there's this whole push towards
Mm.
pop psychology and being able to understand like who you are a little bit better. And again, maybe I'm overcomplicating this and diving a little too deep into the weeds, but it's, if you're just who you want to be, that should be the default. And I think too, it even carries past that, because I've seen this personally working professionally. And I didn't even really realize it until I had a friend of mine I used to work with, and she pointed out it's where we were working was, as a coach, you weren't even really necessarily comfortable expressing who you were, in the environment, whether it's fear of judgment of other
Hmm.
coaches or, and I'm sure it's the same in the online space, where if you put something up, you almost feel like you have to present yourself a certain way. It's,
Hmm.
no, I have
Yeah.
to be the strength coach for other coaches, not just like who you are. And I think that's a fault within every environment, whether it's like online or in person. And so if you can keep kind of reiterating that towards the kids that you're working with, in a session, it's like, it's okay for me to be me, it's okay for you to be you. And I really like the Rumi quote too, where it's you don't want to, it's difficult because it is obviously by nature like a hierarchical
Hmm.
relationship, but it's you want everyone to exist on the same level. It's like
Hmm.
we're not, as much as we are coach and athlete, we're really just like peers. I am learning from you and you are learning from me, as much as we are in some way, shape, or form. And I know there is an exchange of usually money for services in some case, but we're not on different tiers that much. Like we're all people, we are all human. And I just know a little bit more about this and you know a little bit more about other things. It's like we're all on this like even playing field. And I feel the very like the same way, especially talking about coaches and coach development. It's something that always like almost makes me uncomfortable, where it's, you have this immediate idea of what's right or wrong. And maybe that's where I've softened a little bit too, is where, we talk about seeing other people doing things that you don't always agree
Hmm.
with or who they're working with, and reminding myself, especially in like the private or gen pop setting, it's all exercise and they are all trying to do something to help someone. I don't think anyone is coming at it from a point of, I'm trying to deliberately,
Hmm.
get into coaching and take advantage of people and make money that much, where I'm trying to be a little bit more empathetic towards, okay, or curious even towards what their motives are towards it. It's like, where, okay, how can we all learn together? Maybe I get a better understanding of them and they can get a better one of me, so that instead of me approaching it from like a place of judgment and criticism, those coaches are okay to express themselves so they can find out if they're failing, because they might not even know in the first place, the same way that the athletes that you're working with can find out if they're comfortable to fail so they can try again and do better. And should be the same for all the coaches that you work with.
Today's podcast is sponsored by the Just Fly Sports online courses, Elastic Essentials and Sprint Acceleration Essentials. These courses are CEU certified and will expand your viewpoint on explosive athletic performance and skill acquisition. You can head to justflysports.com and click on the courses tab and join the hundreds of other coaches who have already jumped in. Again, you can head to justflysports.com and click on the courses tab to get started. Yeah. It reminds me a little bit too of Paul Cater had said, where I don't know, it's like a place you can still. It's like I don't want to butcher it, but like the gym or physical preparation. And back to what you said, like it's a place that you can play without the pressure of failure, and then you wonder what can that. I guess what can it offer the sport, but what can it also offer your ultimate trajectory beyond the sport? Because I think so often I think about this sometimes too. Is we like what do kids do when they're done? Like be it you finished, you quit it. 15, you quit it. 19, you finished after college. And your whole, I've had conversations with people about this as well. Like your whole thoughts on what is exercise and movement has been shaped by, your sport, which a lot of times people just stop playing and then they just lift. Because all I've done is I play my sport in a very pressured way and we lifted to support the sport. And I like lifting. So I'll keep doing that thing, but I also think which I think is fundamentally good. I mean, that's what I see almost all the time, but it's interesting to think, well, here's some other ways you can embody training and movement. I think that's where like the games come in because it's like, I think that's the idea behind it, with different ways to embody being, just being a human being and as well too. I also find too, I enjoy it's a good way. That's a good mode of connection, especially when I have to jump in. Like we're short an athlete, and I have to jump in on a game, and I'm someone's partner for a game, or I'm involved. It's like you connect with people in a way that you wouldn't if you were just only the coach as well. And I think the kids get a huge kick out of it too. Sometimes when that, like I remember playing some of my best memories of when I was in high school with my high school track coaches was not anything they ever said to me in coaching. It was always like I remember like them like flipping someone in the air playing ultimate frisbee or something like that, or dunking on someone in basketball. Oh, like this teacher came and he dunked on somebody. It's like that was I don't know. I just will always remember those things. That was a connection that was never like to me that was always the biggest thing that connected or brought in that level. So. Yeah, it's interesting or too like, when people are, I think the idea of freedom to be yourself too. I wonder if there's a correlation here. Before a practice, this was one of the best practices we had all year for track, high jump specifically, and a game we played I took from you. It was and this has been the best game. It's funny to think about what games allow for the greatest flow of movement without rules, and it's just grab a jump stretch band and you have two partners and one tries to run away from the other person and keep the band tight and the other person tries to keep the band slack. And I remember we played that game and there was so much laughing. Kids were falling and laughing. Like someone was on the ground just laughing. And then we had the best. It was like literally such a good practice. And you think about and I'm not saying that's the only reason. I think there's a lot of, not to like sell myself short on I think some of the technical progressions we do are pretty good. But I kind of wonder sometimes, what would that practice have looked like without that start? If you come in, it's like, all right, here's all the drills, here's all this, and there's never that and I think different coaches do it different ways too. Like I have a book on my shelf. Mark Guthrie was one of the most successful track coaches in Division III, and this is university too. High performance. And they would just have a stretch time before practice, but it wasn't really a stretch time. He would just go around and talk to people about whatever, like, how's class? How's your mom? Or I don't know, whatever the question is, it was not about track. And so maybe there's just a theme there. And it's interesting to think about with the game. I appreciate that game too that you had posted. That was super cool.
Of course. Yeah, we I mean, I'm sure I stole that from somewhere, but in an effort to like come up with more games and kind of to your point about starting the sessions with energy like that. So this last summer with our summer hockey program, every Friday I would have one of the kids in the morning group, okay, you have to go over to the wall and I need you to pick two pieces of equipment and then we're going to make up a game. We're going to come up with something. So we did, there was, Bosu ball and a medicine ball turned into Bosu ball, spike ball.
Nice.
And then we had, one where it was, I think, a rugby ball and like a glider, like you would do for hamstring curls or something. that one wasn't as good. It was kind of, it was end ball with you had to throw it on the slider, but it just leads to like a lot of creativity and play and fun, both because the thing I like the most though about coming up with new games or movement challenges where you don't have to say too much
Mm,
is because it puts everyone on kind of a level playing field where if you have some pre-existing games or somebody may have practiced before, it's the the elite can rise a little bit faster and then you can separate a little bit more. Whereas if we're all learning at the same time,
mm,
then it's the process of playing and having a fun game instead of winning almost becomes the point, which with especially with youth athletes, I find that's something maybe they've had drilled
mm.
into them so much is it's about the end goal.
Yes.
It's
Yeah.
all right, how do we score points? How do we win? It's like, no, how do we have the most kind of beautiful game possible? And it's in that realm of I feel like overcomplicating things. It's kind of have you ever heard of the midwit meme or the like the normal distribution meme?
Oh, I've seen those memes. Yeah, the bell curve and yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I find, and I mean, like we could apply this anywhere within strength conditioning. It's such a good, it's a perfect meme, really, where it's you have that guy on the left that's kind of a like a troll,
Mhm,
dumb, and then you have the overthinking guy in the middle, and then the Jedi at the far end.
mhm,
And what the Jedi and the dumb guy I say always just kind of ends up being the same thing. So it's
mhm.
we can think about like our technical models and all
Yeah,
this
yeah.
stuff and how what's the perfect way to constrain a game. And it's like game, fun, play. And then,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
it's like play, fun game. Yeah.
That is funny. I'd never thought about that in light of that, because it is almost I think about it kind of maybe in a similar way, like expansion, compression, and expansion, in the sense that we start as kids and everything is expansive, and literally the only goal is fun. Like I like I noticed this so clearly. It was a game I played with my two kids, 6 and 8, and it was Athletic Development Games has all this cool stuff for kids, and one of them is you take a big jump rope, 3-person jump rope, and the game is just wiggle the jump rope. Like it's not like, hey, how high can you jump over? Which my kids will play that game, but there will come a point where they start to fail that either they'll keep trying or they're like, Dad, why are you making me do this? It's kind of one of those two, and you never want to get to the dad, why are you making me? I always try to, and I never, not that I ever was. It's always like, oh, do you want to try to jump higher? Okay, cool, and they're having fun. But as soon as one of the games listed was you just wiggle the rope, you just like take the rope and whoever's holding the rope, just wiggle it and make it wavy. And then you should just see the change in the kids' faces. It goes from like, it's just like, it's everything is just so much fun. It's the epitome of in the moment because who cares how high we don't even know how high the bar is. All I know is I'm jumping over a really wiggly, fun rope. And it's only about that present moment, like avoid the wiggle. There's no outputs. And so it's almost like we start there and then we get to high school or college, and then now we got the metrics and maxes and how fast are you and how high did you jump and what are strengths and weaknesses in your game. I think we need to go there, but I think the problem is if we A, live there, and B, we don't have the outlet. The eventual re-expansion is everything you need to do to continue to improve your game. Like the reason the pros are pros is because they have a bigger bag than they have a more expansive skill set. They can do it
Yeah.
more consistently and repeatedly. They have a more rich mental game in many situations. And it's like that expansive richness that moves beyond that area of compression in the middle. That's how I view it, at least, like that kind of
Yeah,
idea.
so that's like that's it's really interesting you
Yeah.
say that because like that's sort of an analogy that I've used a lot, but in terms of almost like a diamond.
Hmm. Oh, yeah.
So it's like you're talking about kind of like narrow to wide, back to narrow, or like compressed, expanded, and then back to compressing again at the top. And I've always sort of thought about athlete development and really any kind of development that way. It's like you usually start something, you have a very narrow skill set
Mm-hmm.
of ideas and options or solutions, whatever you want to call it. And then over time, like let's say you're a kid or a youth athlete, you broaden that out and you get more and more movement experiences, hopefully through more and more sports or more and more games. Whatever it is you do, you expose yourself to progressively more. But then after a while, and if your goal is, life or performance, we typically like narrow out and we compress again, like you were saying, into one thing. And then so if that's a high performance athlete, you have to narrow it because you can't spend a lot of time out in the wide portion working on
Mm-hmm.
general qualities when
Yeah.
it's you want to be one of the best in the world. But what I've also found is working with general population people, it's you narrow out because life doesn't afford you a lot of different things. We sit at a desk or we
Mm-hmm.
do the same rec activities or after university, you just do the same 3 exercises that you remember every time you go to the gym. And I find like our job very often, because we are, general preparation coaches, is you are trying to like widen people out or
Yeah.
expand them again, because they either, if they're youth athletes, then like we're saying, that's the most fun, because then you get to give them this broad base of movement. And our role is so, I don't want to say low pressure, but it's low stakes by comparison, where it's, I want you to fail. I want you to do things. You know that when you're in a session with me, whether I'm working in a school or I'm working privately, if you mess up, that's totally fine, because I can't reduce your playing time or cut you or something. It's, you're genuinely here just to be here. Or if you're on the other side of it, you're, let's say, someone that used to play sports, or someone that's even in their 50s or 60s. It's like, we're trying to widen you back out
Hmm.
because you don't have as many movement experiences anymore. And that could be something as broad as like, your game is now, can you just do a forward lunge because you haven't
Hmm.
stepped forward more than a walking depth in the last 5 years, if not more. It's and there's so many different names for this too. It's like, people talk about it, like restoring variability,
Hmm.
expanding, whatever you want to call it. It's at its simplest, like, we're just trying to give people more when we see them. And I, again, maybe it's like being a little bit too grandiose, but I like to think of it the same way in terms of like their experiences of what they get to do in the gym and who they get to be. It's like, you get to give people more so they can hopefully go live more of life.
Hmm.
It's, someone's able to jump around a little bit more. Somebody's able to be comfortable playing different kinds of sports or doing different activities, and they get to take that outside of where you are. They're expanded again. And then, like, their life will let them narrow out again. And if again, if they are that high performance athlete, hopefully you've given them a broad enough base to work from or pull from or draw from, where they have more movement options and movement solutions to different problems, where they can refine their performance and like peak at that. They could be at the highest level, at the top of the diamond. Or if they're just, somebody who works down the street, they've got such a wide base of things to draw from, like, for the rest of their life, whether it's they're hiking, they're playing pickleball, they're doing something else. It's, oh, I feel comfortable like moving around dynamically again.
Hmm. Yeah, I totally agree. It's a cool way of thinking in the sense that, and I love what you mentioned before, and that got me thinking like, okay, we have this high pressure modern sports system, and throughout the history of the world. I mean, I'm sure we act like it's something that's totally new. I'm sure like warfare throughout history, which is where physical training really began, is very high pressure situation. You look at like the ancient samurai, or like how like tribes would treat their children like Spartans. Like if you didn't meet the fitness standard, they left you by the side of a mountain. Or like obviously, there's these high pressure situations have obviously existed for a very long time, but we've definitely on the way up with the amount of pressure and single focus, and everything is either you win or you lose. You caught the pass or you didn't, and everything is like, I hope I make the team. I hope I make the next level. And it's almost like that has created, you could say it's like a polarity where, well, there's a need for a re-expansion. I've heard a lot of times people even talk about like a college strength coach as it's an alternative to the sports coach. You can talk, a lot of people feel more free to talk to the strength coach about other things in their life, because it is this kind of like re-expanding alternative area where you can depressurize from the constant pressure that is demanded, that can make you better. I also think too, maybe that changes. What do you think about this? Like how that re-expansion changes depending on where you're at. Like I'm training youth, like we want to really re-expand that base. Like it is very expansive, as many skills and abilities as possible. If I'm a pro player, maybe the re-expansion is just, hey, we're going to do some physical prep. We're getting you into early stance. We're re-expanding your movement options and variability so you can go play. And then maybe we do some stuff you find entertaining. Because I think it's funny. People say, oh, what's these pros playing around balance, or like just this dumb shit. Like maybe I'm just re-expanding and just having fun, because everything else is high pressure, same thing, boom, 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 like, and so maybe the physical purpose that you think this is actually not. Maybe it's just, I want to have a little fun in a different way with what I'm doing, versus I think it's almost like the way that we would, the one that's like what you said, that's the one way you can think about athletic performance, is it's all very specific KPIs that all really drive into it's almost like that would almost be like a one directional way of thinking about it. Everything's KPI, everything's transfer, versus maybe I just polarize it and start with, well, how can I re-expand your movement options and give you a contrast, and then maybe we'll fill in the gaps from there, versus starting from, everything's, this max KPI transfer type piece.
Yeah, and I think, at least in my experience working with, let's say, like hockey players, that's a good summation of how I sort of see things. It's like in the early start of the off season, it is this it's almost like really generalization, if that makes sense, where I mean, you could call it early stance stuff. You could call it, pulling them back.
Hmm.
It could just look like, it's what slow tempo stuff
Yeah.
used to be called. It's much more general training style, and it's a lot more structured. The games are a lot more simple. They're, maybe just like play around and hold this position. It's who can, do the most different shapes. I mean, one that's highly constrained that I always play with that is still affords a lot of freedom is, okay, we're going to do pogos in as many ways as possible. You're going to
Mm.
bounce around, play with each other a little bit here. So it's still pretty constrained. It's pretty low stress, but they're not really thinking about doing it. Or you're going to jump on and jump off this, 18 or 24-inch box as many different ways as possible. And it's still pretty, again, it's low, it's constrained, but it still kind of fits at the start of our general preparation kind of block. Whereas as we keep going and things start chasing more of those KPIs, and it's like I'm looking more at, let's say, a hockey player, let's their sprint times or their crossover sprint times,
Hmm.
their max strength work. But the games, we still do a lot of
Yeah.
those things, kind of like I was talking about before. It's every Friday we're playing some kind of weird game. When we're doing our movement and field sessions, we towards the end of the summer, I could come up with the coolest, most structured change of direction games ever. But if we start in that more structured phase with something that I make up, that's maybe like a flag tag or something, where you're just trying to take the flag off someone's hip or something. By the end of the summer, it's like when we're doing really structured training, and I know they're doing a lot of that in sports too. Our games are just games. We'll play soccer and we'll have fun and do something like that, or we'll play. What is it? We started playing Top Gun football last year too, where there's two footballs going at the same time, kind of thing, offense and defense at once. Just so it's we're focused on playing because they
Hmm.
have so much pressure and
Oh yeah.
structure and everything else they do, that it hopefully is a
Mm.
relief that they're able to just kind of chill out and have fun once in a while.
Yeah. It's interesting to think about too. And maybe this is a different conversation of, I guess, like a free market system of training versus I don't know, obviously every system has its good side and its flaws. And I know like the goal of the communist systems back in the day was to show that their society was superior, and we'll do it through our ordered sports, developmental system. And but I think it was Dan John was saying those Russian jumpers back in the day, like they played volleyball in their off season, like that was their off season. Like, and some of them, they got so into it, some of them, like they didn't want to go back to like their track training or something like that. And I wonder if, I don't know if that kind of thing, the constraints of our system, if that type of thing would be feasible. But it's just interesting to think about, well, yeah, doesn't that just make sense of like, if you have some control at the top, well, hey, you're going to do this sport here, you can do this sport here. And maybe they can try to convince them, the bodies that be, to let them play that sport longer or whatever. I mean, again, I feel like you'd probably have to be there too. And of course, there's all the athletes who didn't make it, who just got thrown against the wall, and okay, you survived and you'll go on in the system or whatever. But yeah, it's interesting to think about that. But I mean, again, it also breeds so much creative ideas, to have to, okay, what are some ways that we can take the pressure off this athlete in their typical sport? What are some ways that we can come up with and have fun? I think the amount of creativity and ideas that come out of that is really something special.
Well, that's the thing too, where you talk about like having fun and like even taking it towards their sport. Maybe if it were more fun along the way, they would keep playing
Yeah.
after they're finished. I mean, I have been fortunate enough where I have worked with a lot of kids from, when they were teenagers into where they're playing professional sports. And that's really cool. But I understand that is the overwhelming minority of
Hmm.
people. Most people will go into sports and then stop after
Yeah.
they either leave high school or they leave university. And that's where I think it's important to have some kind of fun or sense of it, because there's so many kids that go through that sports system and then they don't ever want to look at a ball
Yep.
or play their given sport ever again. And they're, traumatized by it because it was just every day. It was what their whole life was about.
Hmm.
And maybe if we made it a little bit more fun, maybe they'd stick with it a little bit more through their life. And that's just like a nature of where we are in society. It's people aren't going to keep playing professional sports, and we're
Yeah.
comfortable enough that we hopefully want to be able to keep playing.
Hmm.
And I think that's where a lot of like play and training comes from even still, because at least like group fitness or working out on your own, it's fun. It's and hopefully still is, because you get to go do something where you exert yourself. It's in a pretty controlled setting. It doesn't rely on a lot of other people. The injury rates are a lot lower in, just hitting the gym than in playing a rec sport. And maybe if we played more along the way, it wouldn't be that way. But at least when you're I always think it's like the kids that I've worked with, where after they stop playing sports, I hear about how they're obsessed with, it's like, oh, I'm working out now, I'm thinking about doing this, and it's they carry that into who they are and into their life. That always means, and it's probably my bias as like a trainer and coach, but that always means so much more, that I've been able to give them something past where their
Yeah.
sport was. It's like you help somebody with their identity and who they are. And it's like,
Yeah.
oh, I just, like I love going to the gym. I love lifting weights, and it's my happy place. Like it gives you a piece of it gives them a new piece in their life that they can kind of keep playing with and expanding.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. It's interesting to think about too, like I guess what you just said, and where I do see a shift in that direction of this industry, at least especially in the private sector. And I think even it's certainly still in the scholastic sector as well. But how how did things shift for you over time? Meaning like, you're 34 now, when you graduated, when you started working with athletes. I mean, how did your journey like were you I know, like, we live in the age of the world where we a lot more young coaches are seeing things this way, and I think that's interesting. How did your journey along those lines come along? Like, any big shifts along that way?
I'd say the like from a technical standpoint, probably that it is a lot more games based, and it is a lot more like chilled out.
Hmm.
It's a lot more relaxed. I really appreciate a lot of the exposure to motor learning stuff. I always, whenever
Yeah.
I get a chance to go talk to a university or to a school, I tell them I'm sorry that motor learning is so confusing right now, but
Yeah.
it's actually the coolest thing ever if you start to understand it. So I think being able to apply a lot of different games technically, it's almost both ends of the spectrum. I feel like in structured training, when we're in the weight room, I've been able to use more filters to get the outcome that I want, and more constraints to make, a movement look quote unquote good, or that it's
Hmm.
something where I know someone's going to be able to solve that problem, and we're going to train the tissues we want to train
Hmm.
and get the training effect we want. And on the other side, it also looks a lot messier because there's a lot more play to it, at least in the way that I structure training. But I think the way things have changed for me, especially over the last few years, are I've gone from being, a rigid, structured strength coach, at least like in
Hmm.
practice everywhere, to really kind of like we talked about at the beginning of this conversation. It's like it is so much more about the connection. It's about who you do these things with, and that
Yeah.
could be like your colleagues, and making an environment where the other coaches that you work with feel like they can be the best coaches that they can be, because that's one of the reasons I started posting things online too, is I realized that there were people that I know that didn't know how I coached, what I did. And I wanted to be able to be as open and like share myself and my ideas about that, so that either people know that it's okay to do things that way, or that maybe somebody can question me and be curious about what I'm doing. And hopefully I can either refine what I'm doing or learn from somebody else. And that's kind of where I've evolved. Hopefully it's that I like to think of like what I do is we're trying to create the best possible environment for success. And what that means to me is like we're trying to make everyone feel comfortable. And this is credit to some of the people that I've worked with in the last few years that have kind of highlighted that for me, that I was that transition from, just like coaching athletes to helping coach other young coaches that I worked with. And whether that's kids that were assistant coaches for me along the way, that
Mhm.
I I didn't realize how much of it's funny, like I'm kind of almost realizing it now, but it's the modeling role that we play for the athletes that we work with and the people that we work with is huge. But I think it's also a huge one for any coaches that come up at the same time as us. If there's young coaches that are, and I was fortunate enough to work at a facility where there are people like at every step of their journey that I think that's where I've really changed, is being cognizant of that so that I can be a coach that hopefully lets them know they can. I want them to coach better than me. I want
Mm,
the young coaches coming up to go further, faster than I did, hopefully, so they don't make the same mistakes that I do. And I can be compassionate towards them. I remember there was a real turning point where I used to almost like get upset almost when somebody would ask me, a dumb question, about like, oh, what do you think of, like heel wedges, or what do you like? It could be something that, on a Q&A, it'd be like, why do you like plyometrics or something like
mm-hmm.
that?
Yeah.
And it's super vague and broad, and it's like your second year university student question, kind of classic. And I would almost get like, I'd start grumbling and feel myself doing that. And then I had a friend of mine, she called me out. It's like, well, you like teaching people, don't you? I was like, well, yeah. Then why don't you just like teach those people too that are asking these questions and make it help them find the solution the same way as you would an athlete? You're not going to get angry at an athlete, be like, am I doing this right?
Mm,
This feels kind of weird. It's like, well, okay, it's a very valid point. And I think that's where I've shifted the most, is that trying to be someone that hopefully helps other coaches go further faster than I ever could by letting them find their solutions and letting them know the mistakes that I've made, like getting lost in different rabbit holes, like living in the middle of
mm-hmm.
that bell curve. Like
Yeah.
I was firmly in the middle there. And I'm really trying to be the dumb guy now and do the
Mm-hmm.
simplest solutions and be the most approachable in everything that I do. And hopefully I can stay there so that the people who come after me, they've created the environment that we're talking about. It's like there are more games and people feel
Mm-hmm.
safe to try and fail and learn and play.
Yeah. It's like becoming more connection oriented and process oriented. That's that, like those two things. I feel like if you're doing that, I think you're on the right track. I like, John, what you said about motor learning, because I used to hear motor learning like in graduate school or even my 20s and instantly checked out. Like, who cares? Because to me, motor learning is okay, there's an optimal technique. Okay, there's internal cues and external cues to get someone to do that technique. And there's a lot of big words in the landscape that are hard to understand. And it just seems like this very academic thing. Like, and I think that's a lot of people's perception. And then the more, though, I've embraced play and process, the more I'm like, oh, learning or motor learning is actually more about play, process, and exploration and fun than it is kind of these stuffier terms. Even if you look at the cueing, like analogies is more playful. Like Nick Winkelman and Bush Sexator talks about coaches not having some courage to have more fun with the way you cue, like some of these analogies, and how that can be a playful thing. And once I think we can reach that point of process and play where learning is now a playful experience, be it, okay, like we're exaggerating the air. That's one of the most playful ways that you can cue, because it's like, you're gonna make me look stupid doing this thing, exaggerating the thing I'm doing wrong. What, and then you get to do the right thing. And it's amazing. Like, just to me, that I've found that those worlds have, as they've gotten closer, motor learning is one of my favorite things. Even like variable learning, differential learning, and even constraints where you get to see how an athlete problem solves a constraint. That is where it does get to that, like, I guess, yeah, either end, like the Jedi on the end, or the the dumb guy on the other side. Like, it's just the
Yeah.
process. It's fun, and it's just with a different overview. So I appreciate you brought up something about motor learning. I always am trying to figure out, why do people not seem to appreciate and get into that as much as other topics. And I think part of it, you haven't seen the play in it yet.
Yeah. I think especially like through university. I mean, I remember at least I don't know what it is at other universities, but at UBC, the motor learning class has the lowest average in the kinesiology
Yeah,
program. So I think people
yeah.
strayed away from it as much as possible. But I
Mm,
remember the studies in the 200 level where they were talking about, they're talking about internal and external cues, but it's about like touch this red light or touch this blue light
mm,
or think about your hand touching it, and you just don't see the application. And I mean, really credit to, I guess, Rob Gray's books have
yeah,
been
so
excellent
good.
in terms
Yeah.
of being able to highlight how it actually carries over. And it was when I was in, I think it was a grad level class where we really started going into it, and it finally clicked. And this was probably around the same time as Nick Winkelman was, did the whole language of coaching. And you're able to understand, oh, this is actually just what I'm doing. This is how this carries over. It's how I talk to people. It's how I set up games. It's how I set up exercises. And in that same way, it's you talk about being able to create an environment for people. It's we're just setting up the environment. That's all we're doing
Mm,
through the things that we're talking about. It's like through being yourself, through being that person that lets people fail. Like
yeah.
that's all part of the environment. It's not just the constraints that you put on one drill. It's everything as soon as somebody walks into your space that makes them feel or like lets
Mhm.
them try and do the thing and be okay failing, learning, whatever it is. Like, so they hopefully get to that intended outcome and they hopefully start to almost teach themselves. Like the best coaching
Yeah.
is not coaching at all. It's through
Yeah.
inception almost, where it's like you just sort of let this idea kind of they feel like they thought of it on their own.
Yeah. I agree. And yeah, it's like another thing too, where like learning is, I love how Nick Winkelman talks about the spotlight of attention, and you kind of start to see where an athlete's spotlight is, in that sense. I think building that sense it's so enjoyable. But like you said too, you could have the best cues in the world, but if an athlete is too afraid to like express themselves, and there's like and because of the environment or how you're trying to present yourself as this like authority, it's that attention just is different. And so, anyways, I know we could talk about that.
Yeah.
I maybe like hopefully continue that conversation. I love that stuff. But Jon, where can people, if people want to learn more about what you are doing, training, social media, any place people can find you?
Yeah, the best place is probably through I post pretty frequently on Instagram, just at Jon Stea 01. So Stea spelled Stea. And then I technically have a podcast as well called To Depth with Jon. Although we're a few episodes less than usual. I'm working on it. And then other than that, yeah, I train in person in the greater Vancouver area, and yeah, that's about that.
Awesome. Well, hey, it was great talking to you today. Thanks for being a guest. It was great that we could connect here and make this happen.
Yeah, thanks so much, Joel. Really, really appreciate the opportunity. I've been, a longtime fan of the show, so this is really cool for me.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode. It was great having you here, and I'll see you next week.